In a nation trembling under despair, a single man carried a burden so heavy it could shake the very soul of a people. One prayer, one moment of faith, one spark that ignited a movement no one could ignore. This is the story of Evan Roberts, the man whose quiet devotion would bring an entire nation to its knees and leave a legacy whispered through history. Before we uncover the untold struggles, miraculous awakenings, and the weight of a calling that transformed communities forever, pause for a moment. Hit that like button, subscribe to journey through more extraordinary tales like this, and share this video with someone who needs to witness a story of courage, faith, and destiny. Brace yourself. What you are about to see is not just history. It is a revelation, a secret, a spark that still burns today. In a time when despair gripped the very heart of a nation, hope seemed like a distant echo, a faint whisper drowned out by hardship, unrest, and uncertainty. The streets were filled with weary faces, and the churches, once overflowing with fervor, had grown silent. People prayed in private, uncertain if their voices could reach beyond the walls of their homes. And yet, amidst the shadows of fear and doubt, there arose a figure whose life would alter the course of history. His name was Evan Roberts. From the outside, Evan appeared ordinary, an unassuming young man with quiet eyes that held a depth most overlooked. But beneath his calm exterior lay a burden far greater than anyone could imagine. A burden born not of ambition, but of an unshakable calling. One that would ignite a revival, shake the foundations of the nation, and leave its people on their knees in awe, humility, and repentance. The early 1900s in Wales were a period of turbulence. Industrial towns, blackened by coal smoke, struggled with poverty, labor strikes, and a society teetering between secular influence and the waning fire of spiritual fervor. Families were fractured, communities were restless, and the youth wandered aimlessly, searching for meaning. The churches, though present, had begun to feel the weight of routine, tradition, and complacency. Worship was quiet, almost lifeless, and the longing for something extraordinary filled the hearts of many. It was in this fragile environment that Evan Roberts began to feel a stirring within, a subtle yet persistent whisper guiding him toward a path that no one else could see. It started with small, almost imperceptible signs, moments of intense prayer, visions of communities transformed, and a deep ache in his heart for the souls of his people. Friends and family noticed the change, some with admiration, others with concern, for they did not understand the weight he carried. Evan's burden was both personal and collective. He wrestled with doubt, wondering if he was truly capable of answering the call and if the world around him was ready for the awakening he sensed was coming. Each night, he poured out his heart in prayer, asking for guidance, for strength, and for clarity. And though fear occasionally whispered that he was alone in this mission, the conviction within him only grew stronger. He sensed that the nation itself was poised on the brink, and that one spark, one voice of unwavering faith could ignite a flame no darkness could extinguish. As Evan wrestled with this divine calling, little did he know that his life was about to intersect with destiny in ways unimaginable. The burden he carried, the weight of a nation's spiritual awakening, was about to become both his cross and his miracle. What started as quiet prayers in a small room would soon erupt into gatherings filled with fire, fervor, and a force that would shake every corner of Wales. And so the stage was set, a nation on edge, a young man with a heavy burden, and the first flicker of a revival that would leave an indelible mark on history. But before the world could witness the miracle, Evan had to face the deepest struggles within himself. As the spark of revival whispered in the distance, Evan Roberts carried a burden few could understand, a weight that pressed heavily on his soul. To the outside world, he was a young preacher, earnest and devoted, yet the quiet intensity in his eyes betrayed a struggle far deeper than mere sermons and gatherings. He felt the collective pain of a nation's spiritual hunger, as if it were his own heartbeat. Every prayer he uttered, every tear he shed, was intertwined with the longing of countless souls seeking light in the darkness. Evan's days were filled with ordinary tasks, walking the narrow streets of his hometown, conversing with neighbors, attending church meetings, but each step, each word was underscored by a growing urgency. He sensed that ordinary acts of ministry would no longer suffice. There was a burden placed upon him, divine and immense, that demanded courage, persistence, and sacrifice beyond anything he had ever imagined. Late at night, he would retreat to the quiet of his small room, the dim glow of a single candle casting elongated shadows on the walls. There, kneeling in prayer, he wrestled with fear, doubt, and the enormity of the task before him. "Am I capable of carrying this?" he would ask silently. "Will my heart withstand the trials ahead? Can I truly be the instrument through which a nation is healed?" The weight of these questions pressed down upon him, yet beneath the pressure lay a quiet, unwavering conviction. The calling was real, and it would not be denied. It was during these moments of solitude that Evan first began to experience the deep stirrings that would later define the revival. He spoke of visions, not of grandeur, but of people transformed, of entire communities revived, of hearts softened by the touch of grace. These visions haunted him, both terrifying and exhilarating, for he knew that such change could not occur without resistance, and that resistance would come from without and within, from a world unwilling to see, and from the human frailty that haunted even the most faithful of hearts. The burden, however, was not only spiritual. Evan faced skepticism and opposition from those closest to him. Friends whispered doubts, clergy questioned his methods, townspeople murmured that he was overstepping the bounds of tradition. Each challenge felt like a stone added to his shoulders, yet each also affirmed the necessity of his mission. For he understood that the greater the opposition, the greater the impact of what was to come. In his quiet heart, Evan learned to embrace the weight, seeing it not as a punishment, but as preparation. Stories began to emerge from those who encountered Evan during these formative days, accounts of men and women brought to tears in prayer, of small gatherings where the air seemed charged with something unseen yet undeniable. And though these early stirrings were modest, they carried an intensity that hinted at what lay ahead. He carried the burden of their expectations, yes, but also the burden of their unspoken hopes, the desperate yearning for relief, for faith rekindled, for a miracle that could awaken the soul of a weary nation. Evan's burden was also intensely personal. Behind the fervor lay moments of isolation, of nights spent questioning the very path he had chosen. The spiritual weight he carried was mirrored by physical exhaustion. Long walks between towns, endless nights of study and prayer, and the constant pull of a calling that would not allow rest. And yet, within that exhaustion was an unmistakable sense of purpose. Every heartbeat, every prayer, every tear shed in quiet solitude was a testament to his unwavering commitment. It was in these moments that the nature of the revival became clearer, even before it fully manifested. Evan realized that his burden was not a curse, but a bridge, connecting human despair to divine intervention. The weight on his shoulders was a mirror of the nation's suffering, and the path he would take was one of sacrifice and faith. The greater the burden, the greater the potential for awakening. And though fear sometimes whispered that he might falter, Evan pressed forward, knowing that surrendering to doubt was not an option. By the time the first public gatherings began, Evan had already endured months of inner struggle, a personal crucible that would define the trajectory of the revival. Every private prayer, every tearful meditation, every moment of fear had shaped him into a vessel ready to bear the nation's pain. And as he stepped before the first groups of worshipers, he was no longer merely a man. He was the embodiment of a calling too heavy for ordinary shoulders, yet precisely what the world required. And so the burden revealed its dual nature, terrifying in its magnitude, yet luminous in its purpose. Evan Roberts carried the weight of a nation not as a punishment, but as a divine commission. The time for preparation was over. The time for action had arrived. And with the first murmurs of collective prayer rising in those small gatherings, the stage was set for a transformation that would leave the nation trembling and changed forever. The first whispers of revival began quietly, almost imperceptibly. In small, dimly lit halls and modest chapels, people gathered, not expecting miracles, not anticipating the extraordinary. Yet, as Evan Roberts entered these rooms, there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Every step he took, every word he uttered, carried a weight that resonated far beyond the walls of the building. The burden he had carried in solitude was now beginning to ripple outward, touching the hearts of those around him. It started with prayer meetings, humble assemblies where the air seemed charged with anticipation. Evan spoke with intensity and humility, his words piercing through the doubts and weariness of the crowd. He did not preach with theatrics or grandeur. Instead, his sermons were simple, heartfelt, and raw, reflecting the struggle he had endured in private. And yet there was a power in his presence, a divine force that seemed to illuminate even the darkest corners of human doubt. As word spread, the gatherings grew larger. Crowds that once barely filled the pews now overflowed into streets, lingering in silence, waiting for a glimpse of Evan's unwavering devotion. People came from miles around, drawn not only by curiosity, but by a sense that something historic was unfolding before their eyes. Skeptics whispered doubts, questioning whether a young preacher could truly carry the weight of an entire nation's spiritual awakening. But for those present, doubt gave way to awe. Eyes widened as hearts were stirred, and the energy in these gatherings became palpable, almost tangible. The revival was not instantaneous. It was a gradual awakening, a series of moments that collectively ignited a movement. Individuals testified of the profound changes they felt in their lives, families reconciled, addictions broken, despair lifted. And while these personal transformations were remarkable, the true power of the revival lay in its communal impact. Entire communities were touched, as though a wave of unseen energy had swept across towns and villages, awakening souls that had long lain dormant. Evan's burden, once an intimate struggle, now manifested as a guiding force. He carried not just the hopes of a few, but the spiritual longing of a nation. Every meeting, every prayer circle became an opportunity for that weight to transform into purpose. He prayed with a fervor that inspired others to reach deeper within themselves, to confront the emptiness in their own hearts, and to surrender to a power far greater than their understanding. And yet, with growth came tension. Not everyone welcomed the awakening. Some viewed the gatherings with suspicion, fearing the disruption of tradition and the challenge to established authority. Newspapers reported in hushed tones of strange fervor and unexplained phenomena, while critics suggested that mass hysteria rather than divine intervention was at play. Evan faced these doubts with quiet determination, understanding that resistance was a natural companion to any movement of profound change. He did not waver, for he knew the burden he carried was not for acclaim or approval, but for the fulfillment of a higher purpose. The revival was also marked by moments of the miraculous. Accounts spread of individuals healed from long-term ailments, hearts renewed, and spirits lifted. Entire congregations wept openly, overcome by an intensity of emotion that defied explanation. Evan, standing at the center, remained humble, attributing every transformation to the divine rather than to himself. His burden had become a bridge between despair and hope, and the manifestation of his prayers confirmed that his calling was real, powerful, and far-reaching. Even as the gathering swelled, Evan maintained the discipline that had forged him. Long walks between towns, solitary nights of prayer, and constant study of the scriptures kept him grounded. He understood that the revival was not his own triumph, but a living, breathing force that required careful nurturing. And in those quiet moments, the burden he had carried alone now felt lighter, not because the weight had diminished, but because it was shared, multiplied across every heart that had been touched. Communities began to transform. Factories and streets once filled with despair now echoed with hymns of gratitude. Families reunited, children returned to faith, and the moral fabric of towns strengthened. The revival was no longer confined to one hall or one village. It had become a tidal wave sweeping across the nation. The spark that had started in Evan's heart had ignited a movement that would define an era. And yet the burden remained. Evan knew that with every soul touched, with every life transformed, the responsibility grew. The revival could not be controlled, contained, or predicted. It flowed like a river, guided by unseen currents, and he, its humble instrument, would bear the weight of that river's path. Every prayer, every sermon, every act of compassion was a reminder that the burden of a nation's spiritual awakening was both gift and trial. By the time the revival reached its peak, thousands gathered to witness its power firsthand. Streets overflowed, churches could not contain the crowds, and the energy of collective faith surged like a living force. Evan Roberts, once a solitary figure burdened by doubt, now stood at the center of a spiritual awakening so profound that historians would later call it the Welsh Revival, a moment when one man's devotion altered the destiny of an entire nation. The stage was set for the next chapter. The nation had felt the weight of Evan's burden, experienced its transformative power, and begun to bow in recognition of something far greater than human endeavor. But with every miracle and every awestruck gathering came challenges yet unseen, moments that would test the limits of faith, endurance, and the human spirit. The revival had grown beyond small halls, beyond the reach of isolated towns. It had become a tidal force, touching the lives of thousands. Streets overflowed with people seeking the solace and awakening that Evan Roberts' presence had ignited. Entire communities, once apathetic and weary, now trembled under a weight they could not fully comprehend. The nation itself seemed to inhale in anticipation, and in every heartbeat, Evan felt the enormous responsibility of the burden he had carried so faithfully in private. Each gathering became a spectacle not of grandeur, but of raw, undeniable spiritual power. People came with skepticism, yet left with hearts broken open, tears streaming, and voices lifted in unison. The energy of collective prayer was almost tangible, a force that defied explanation, bridging the gap between ordinary human experience and divine intervention. Children knelt alongside elders, factory workers alongside scholars, every soul, regardless of status, drawn into a wave of faith and surrender. Evan himself remained a focal point, yet he was no longer the center of the revival. He had become its conduit. His burden, once solitary and suffocating, now radiated outward, touching every individual, every heart, and every life in ways he could not predict or control. He moved among the crowds with humility, praying quietly, offering guidance, and witnessing the transformative impact of the awakening firsthand. The nation's response was overwhelming. Towns and villages that had once known despair now pulsed with a sense of renewal. Workplaces became arenas of reconciliation. Families reunited after years of estrangement, and communities came together in ways previously unimaginable. People spoke of inexplicable healings, sudden bursts of clarity, and profound emotional release. The revival had ceased to be a collection of gatherings. It had become a movement, a living testament to the power of faith carried to its fullest expression. Yet alongside the awe and gratitude came resistance. Not all welcomed the upheaval of long-held traditions. Local authorities and some church leaders viewed the swelling revival with suspicion, fearing disorder or the erosion of established structures. Newspapers sensationalized the gatherings, describing them as mass hysteria or uncontrolled fervor. Even as thousands experienced miracles, there were voices that doubted, criticized, and dismissed. And through it all, Evan bore these criticisms not as setbacks, but as part of the burden he had accepted, the tension between human expectation and divine purpose. The weight of the nation's spiritual awakening pressed upon him, but it also refined him. He moved from town to town, addressing crowds, encouraging prayer circles, and fostering reconciliation among neighbors. Every interaction required energy, focus, and compassion. The revival's reach was immense, but Evan understood that its success depended not on spectacle, but on sincerity, on the depth of connection between heart and faith. The burden he carried had transformed into a mission of both profound responsibility and extraordinary beauty. Moments of miraculous intervention became more frequent. Accounts emerged of the sick healed, of addictions broken, of hopeless lives finding purpose. The people spoke in hushed tones of the unexplainable, hearts softened in a single prayer, tears flowing uncontrollably as burdens they had carried for decades lifted in a single, overwhelming wave of spiritual force. And in these moments, Evan felt the culmination of his burden, a mixture of awe, humility, and a deep, unshakable sense of divine presence. Despite the magnitude of the revival, Evan's own humanity remained intact. Nights were spent in quiet reflection, praying not for personal glory, but for the sustainability of the awakening. He recognized that the fervor, though powerful, could falter if not nurtured with care. And so, while the nation fell to its knees in collective surrender, Evan balanced the soaring momentum with discipline, prayer, and the quiet wisdom born from years of bearing the weight alone. The revival reached its emotional and spiritual climax when entire towns experienced moments of unified worship unlike anything previously imagined. Streets became sanctuaries, public spaces resonated with chants, prayers, and the murmur of souls awakening. People wept openly, touched by a force they could neither see nor fully comprehend. Evan, standing amid the crowds, could feel the nation's collective heart beating in rhythm with his own burden, a burden that had now become a shared experience, a living testament to faith realized. It was in this overwhelming convergence of human longing and divine intervention that the true scope of Evan's burden became clear. What had begun as private prayers and solitary contemplation had evolved into a movement that reshaped communities, healed individuals, and united a nation. Every tear, Every whispered plea, every miracle was a reflection of the weight he had carried and a proof of the power that one individual's dedication could unleash. Yet even at this pinnacle, Evan understood that the burden was not complete. The revival had reached its zenith in these towns, but the echoes of its impact would resonate far beyond the immediate moment. The responsibility, the pressure, and the mission continued. The nation had been brought to its knees, but the journey toward lasting transformation demanded vigilance, humility, and unwavering faith. As the crowds dispersed, hearts stirred, and spirits awakened, Evan looked upon the nation he had carried so dearly, not with pride, but with reverent understanding of the burden that had made it all possible. The stage was now prepared for reflection, legacy, and the secret that had changed everything. A truth that would endure far beyond the revival. The revival had left its mark. Streets once silent now hummed with life. Churches overflowed, and hearts long weighed down by despair were lifted. Yet, the true measure of Evan Roberts' work could not be captured merely in numbers or testimonies. It lay in the transformation of spirit, the awakening of faith, and the enduring sense that a nation had been touched by something far greater than human effort. The burden he had carried, the weight of countless souls, and the responsibility of a nation had been fulfilled, but it was not lost to history. It became a secret etched into the fabric of the people's hearts, a mystery that spoke to those willing to listen. Evan himself remained humble, retreating often to the quiet spaces where his journey had begun. He knew that the revival's outward manifestations, the crowds, the miracles, the fervor, were reflections of a deeper, unseen work. The real miracle was the inner awakening, the softening of hardened hearts, the rekindling of hope, the courage to believe when all seemed lost. That secret, the source of true transformation, was what had shaken everything, what had brought a nation to its knees, and what continued to resonate long after the final gathering dispersed. History would remember Evan Roberts as a young preacher with extraordinary influence, but the secret he carried was far subtler, far more profound. It was the quiet, unwavering faith that had allowed him to bear the weight of an entire nation's spiritual longing. It was the conviction that even in solitude, even amid doubt and opposition, a single heart attuned to divine purpose could ignite change. And it was the realization that the burden he bore, heavy and daunting as it was, had the power to create miracles, not just for one moment, but for generations to come. Communities continued to feel the echo of the revival. Stories were passed down, families reconciled, individuals healed, and communities strengthened. The fire that Evan had ignited did not fade. It transformed into a lasting ember, inspiring others to carry the torch of faith forward. People who had once been hesitant to believe now shared the message, extending the influence of a burden once carried alone. And in this spreading light, the secret became clear. The true power of faith and devotion was not in spectacle or recognition, but in the quiet persistence of one committed soul. For Evan, the journey never truly ended. Though the revival had reached its peak, the responsibility of bearing the nation's spiritual awakening remained a part of him. He reflected often on the lessons learned, that burden is inseparable from purpose, that struggle strengthens resolve, and that transformation begins with a single willing heart. In carrying his burden faithfully, he had not only changed a nation, but had also revealed the eternal truth that one person's dedication can ripple outward in ways unimaginable. And so, the secret that shook everything was not a singular event, a dramatic moment, or a fleeting miracle. It was the realization that faith, when coupled with courage and humility, carries weight beyond comprehension. It is the quiet power to touch hearts, to awaken souls, and to leave a nation forever altered. Evan Roberts bore that burden, endured the struggle, and allowed the nation to kneel, not in despair, but in reverent awe of what devotion can accomplish. As the story draws to a close, one truth remains. The weight of purpose, carried with faith and integrity, is the most potent force in the world. Evan Roberts' burden had been heavy, but through it, a nation discovered its own capacity for renewal, awakening, and divine encounter. And that is the secret, a truth that even today continues to inspire, to awaken curiosity, and to remind us all of the extraordinary potential of a single committed heart. Evan Roberts' journey reminds us that one person's unwavering faith and courage can awaken a nation. The burden he carried was heavy, yet through it, countless hearts were transformed, communities renewed, and history reshaped. His story is a testament to the power of persistence, the unseen weight of responsibility, and the extraordinary ripple effects of one committed soul. If Evan's story moved you, like this video, subscribe for more extraordinary tales, and share it with someone who needs inspiration today. Drop your reflections and where you are watching from in the comments section. I want to hear your thoughts on courage, faith, and the power of one life to change the world. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.